Greetings, scholar, and welcome to this short presentation of the second genre we will be looking at, and that is poetry. We have the images of Emily Dickinson, Edgar Allen Poe, and William Shakespeare, and those are the authors of the poems that I have asked you to look at for today. So I'm going to give you some poetry words. These aren't the kind of things that you'll be examined on, although it would surprise me if a couple, two or three of them have seeped into the teaching situation that you will be working on. But they're interesting. And we'll also be looking at scansion, which is a discussion of sound and rhythm. We will be considering a poem by Shakespeare, a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and a few poems by Emily Dickinson. And then I'll close out by comparing poetry with prose. The image to the right, by the way, is Canon Fleming reciting the Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. And this is an RCA record. My guess is this is probably from the early 1920s, if not earlier. And it just goes to show that poetry was at one time so popular in our society that it was one of the first things that's made its way onto record and radio. So, the themes of poetry. Well, poetry focuses on the big truths, and love and death remain major themes in all world literature. Eat, survive, and reproduce. Love and try not to die. So it wouldn't surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise you, that is the focus of much poetry. So, there are special words that we use when talking about literature, and particularly when talking about poetry. These words are largely derived from Greek, and that is because in universities, Greek literature and Latin literature, Roman literature, was originally what was focused on. So these concepts, all of them, all of them don't apply so well with English language poetry, but we still use them. So one that does apply, that is rhyme. If it is end rhyme, it is at the end of the line. If it is internal rhyme, it is within the line. If it is half rhyme, it doesn't quite rhyme, and slant rhyme is another term for that. You have the aspect of assonance, which is repetition of similar vowel sounds. You have alliteration, now called consonants, which is repetition of consonant sounds. You have onomatopoeia, when things sound like what they are, like the word drip sounds a little bit like a drip. And then we have meters. What kind of feet are used? Is it iambic, anapestic, trochaic, or dactylic? And we'll have examples of all of these. And also, how many of these iambs, anapests, trochais, and dactyls are in a line? If there are 3 of them, it's trimeter. If there are 4 of them, it's tetrameter. If there are 5 of them, it's pentameter. The most common meter in English language poetry, and the vast majority of what was written by William Shakespeare, John Milton, John Donne, is in iambic pentameter. 5 iambs, 5 feet of soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, stress on the syllables. When it comes to what happens inside of our brain, we have imagery. If an image stands for something that everybody understands, it is a symbol. If there is a comparison with like or as, your eyes are like two blue limpid pools, that is a simile. If the comparison is made more directly, your eyes are two limpid pools, that is called a metaphor. If something that normally is not considered a person is considered a person, like the weather or a jar being stubborn and open, we call that personification. And there is also this element of synecdoche, where you name a part and it stands for the whole. How many head of cattle do you have? All hands on deck. Here we have the part standing for the whole. And then we have metonymy, which is using a closely associated thing. For instance, the pen is mightier than the sword, meaning that writing is more powerful than warfare. And lastly, we have a type of comparison, a type of symbol, allusion, which is a reference that we recognize immediately as coming from another important text. The most common allusions in English poetry is Greek or Roman mythology, and of course, the Holy Bible. Okay, now we're going to talk a bit about feet. We have the I am, which is that rhythm. We have the anapest. We have the trochee. And we have the dactyl. We have the spondee, which is two strong syllables. And we have pyrrhic, two weak syllables. And a half stress, because this kind of scansion does not work well with English all the time. We indicate that with these two lines. If it's 1 foot in a line, it's monometer. Dimeter is 2. Trimeter is 3. Tetrameter, pentameter, hexameter, heptameter. Okay? Let's try some. Beside the ungathered rice he lay, his sickle in his hand. His breast was bare, his matted hair was buried in the sand. Again in the mist a shadow of sleep, he saw his native land. Okay. We have there iams and anapests. It seems that we have 4 feet in all of the odd numbered lines, and we have 3 feet in all of the even lines. And the even lines seem to be pretty much iams. And since there are 3 of them, it's iambic trimeter. Okay, broadly speaking, where is the beauty in poetry? How does it work upon us? Well, poetry is appreciated both for its sound quality, it is euphonist, it is good sounding, and its images. It appeals to the senses, warmth, cold, taste, touch. It is suggestive. It does not often come right out and say what it means. And because of the way that the poetry is put together, in particular consonants and the rhyme scheme, many of these qualities of poetry are used as mnemonic devices to help the bards remember them. In other words, to help people remember them so they can recite them later. It is, in a sense, a carryover from pre-literate society. Let's listen to Shakespeare's famous 18th sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderst in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. In a nutshell, like the summer's day, someday you're going to get old and ugly, but because of the beauty that the poet, the persona, has portrayed in the poem, you are going to live forever. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. The poem gives you a kind of eternal life. That's kind of cool. Okay, the selection of words. This is basically about the weather. Summer's day, rough winds, too hot, nature's changing course, eternal summer, shade. These are all things that have to do with the temperature and the quality of the air. Look at the lines. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. It's rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. It's trying awfully hard to get into iambs, and there are 5 of them per line, so we've got iambic pentameter. It is a sonnet, which means it is a 14-line poem, but it is arranged in 3 groups of 4 with a rhyming couplet at the end. Okay, and note the rhyme scheme. Day, May, temperate, date. Now, temperate and date don't rhyme perfectly, but they half rhyme. They slant rhyme. So, what do you do with a poem? Well, when you have to explain it, your number one job is to determine what happens in the poem on the literal level. And what happens in the poem on the literal level is that there is a lover and there is a beloved, and the lover is comparing his beloved to a summer's day. You have to determine the voice of the poem. It is not identical with the author. Likewise, the narrator of a story is not identical with the author. But there is a persona. There is a person speaking the poem. Whom is the persona addressing? Well, could be talking to you or me, but in this case it seems to be talking to a specific person who he seems to care about. What is the persona saying? In a nutshell, right now, you're really, really fair. You're like a summer's day, but that's not going to last forever. So I write this poem about how beautiful you are, and you will live forever. Also, in the cycle of sonnets, this comes right after 17, which does suggest that the beloved have a child. So preservation of the beauty of the beloved seems to be an overarching theme in this sequence. Again, the English sonnet, 3 groups of 4, that's called a quatrain, and a rhyming couplet at the end. Usually, there is an element of comparison or argument or an idea in each of the distinct quatrains, usually with a couple of different metaphors, and the rhyming couplet presents a conclusion that cinches the whole thing together. Okay, that is a Shakespearean sonnet, and those, I believe, were published a little bit after the year 1600. But I would like to go to a poem from the middle of the 19th century, so we're only moving 250 years forward in time, to the great Edgar Allan Poe, and one of the most beautiful love stories of all time, Annabel Lee. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. She was a child and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud by night, chilling my Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know, in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of a cloud, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I see the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the side of the sea. Wow. It's like you've got your own little Game of Thrones in that poem. Back to medieval times and a lovely woman who was taken from her suitor far, far too early. So, the stanzas, 6 line, 8 line, times 2. The rhyme scheme, as you will see, is very, very tight. And by the way, those letters stand for the words rhyming. So many, many a year ago, a kingdom you may know, right? And then kingdom by the sea, Annabel Lee. Okay, so that is the rhyme scheme, and you see that there is a very, very tight rhyme scheme, particularly with the E sound. Now, we have in this poem internal rhyme. Can ever dissever my soul from the soul. The moon never beams without bringing me dreams. rise and tide, all the night tide I lie down by the side. So within each line, there is also rhyme. It's held together that way. And then we have the repetition of the long I sound. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side. By, side, lie, tide, night. Goodness gracious, how many long I's he has stuck into that line. Half of the syllables contain it. Also, masterful use of consonants, also known as alliteration. A wind blew out of a cloud. Wind blew out cloud. 4 W sounds. Okay? The demons down under the sea. Demons down, repetition of the D sound. And these consonant sounds make it sound interesting to us and also help us remember it. The rhythm of this poem is novel but regular. For instance, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. I'm not really sure if we've got anapests and iambs or dactyls and trochees, but nonetheless, the rhythm does carry it through. Alrighty, I want to stay in the same century, and the next poems were all written around the same time as Annabel Lee, and these poems were by Emily Dickinson. And she wrote a lot of poems. Most of them were not published in her lifetime. I believe in 1955 they were collected and issued, and they were given numbers. And then not too long ago, well, actually, probably 15 years ago, they found a bunch more poems, and they reordered them, and they gave them new numbers. And Emily Dickinson's poems are discussed by the numbers. Okay. See if you can guess what this is about. Wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port, done with a compass, done with a chart, rowing in Eden, the sea, might I but moor tonight in thee. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a love poem of extremely unbridled passion. Wild nights, I don't have to draw it too fine to at least suggest what one of those meanings would be. And wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. So the persona is not with his or her beloved. Futile the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Winds don't affect me anymore because I don't need to travel. My heart is in port. I don't need a compass. I don't need a map. I know where I want to be. Rowing in Eden, the sea, might I but moor tonight in thee. Now, rowing in Eden, the sea. Eden, Adam and Eve, boy, girl, man, woman. And this expression, might I but moor tonight in thee. Look up the word moor, and I think you'll get a very clear notion of what the persona has in mind. Okay, so who is the voice? Who is the listener? The beloved and the lover and the beloved, as is usual. Lots of consonants, or not lots, but wild nights, wild nights. We got the W there. Uh, we've got slant rhyme in the second stanza. And the overarching metaphor is about ships. And the persona is a ship, and his beloved is a port. Rowing in Eden, we have a biblical allusion to the story of the garden in Genesis. Okay, that's love. Let's go to something else that is just as universal. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. Well, that is a very interesting poem, and I think you can figure out what it's about by the very last word. This is about death and dying, passing of time. Creating an allegory of the end of the day with the end of life, and perhaps we feel a bit melancholy when we think about it. I picture the persona standing in a field as the sun is setting on a February afternoon. And it makes this person think of maybe some of the sad things that occur in church. It bothers us, and it hurts us even, but not physically. It's an internal difference where the meanings are. It hurts us emotionally. When this slant of light comes, the landscape listens. So it's very quiet. Shadows hold their breath, like a bunch of people in the room while a person is dying. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. The look of death and how far it looks into the distance. It's kind of a cliche from television and films. Most of us have not seen a dead person, fortunately. But still, in the middle of the 19th century, death was a weekly, if not daily, occurrence. All right. So the persona, a person standing outdoors on a winter evening or sunset, contemplating life, perhaps talking to herself or himself. It's not improbable. There is some consonants. The meter is somewhat regular, and yet it stumbles a bit. And it does have full end rhyme on even lines throughout the poem. It just does describe a landscape. And the persona may simply be musing and talking to herself. We get references to church service, although not exactly an allusion to any bits of the Bible or any hymns. And we get this notion that death has a sort of imperial authority. That it is the ultimate ruler of life. Okay, one last poem by the great Emily Dickinson. And what I would like you to do as you audit this and as I read it, is watch what happens both rhythmically and the rhyme scheme as the bird discovers a person looking at it. Here we go. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angle worm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean to silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. Goodness. The second that he catches sight of the person, the ride scheme breaks in stanza 3. Okay. This poem is very much like a nursery rhyme rhythm. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock struck 1, and down he come, hickory dickory dock. Okay, but there's a difference toward the end. Who is the personae? Well, it is someone who has had this experience with a bird, but maybe the bird isn't a bird. Maybe the bird stands for an implicit beloved. Who can say? What is the tone? Kind of playful, and yet it's very much about nature and cruel nature. The bird is eating a worm, after all. Nature subjects: birds, worms, grass, beetle. The rhyme breaks off from full rhyme and goes to slant rhyme. Why? Because the static situation of the bird becomes fluid. He takes to his wing. He flies. So exactly the second half of the poem by line combines metaphors for sowing and rowing. And the flow of the speech in the last quarter of the poem is novel. We have, in the description, we have observation, we have interaction, and we have reaction. It is a meeting of nature with humanity, a meeting of a shy suitor and his beloved. Who can say? And that word choice, or butterflies off banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. And it's interesting that we have the word plashless, and by the way, plash was another word for splash. And yet by using the word plashless, you are making a splash sound with onomatopoeia. Well, kind of a neat trick. Okay. We're moving on to the end of this talk. Sorry for the mistakes. I'm reading this in very, very late at night so that you can enjoy it over the weekend. Poetry is different from prose, as you will see. And there's Edgar Allen Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Hawthorne being another author that I hope to introduce you to in this course. Poetry, well, according to Poe, the main purpose of poetry is to create an emotional state in the listener. And the tools that we have for that are the sound of the work. Now, the poetry is written by a poet, but is told via the persona. And poetry uses figurative language to create images. And these images unfurl on our brain, and that is part of the experience. Poetry tends to focus on eternal truth about people or the world. As I said before, love and death seem to be pretty often involved in poetry. Whereas realist prose, like a story or an essay, tries to entertain with a story. It may imply a deeper theme, however, and it also may try to be persuasive by example, like naturalism, showing how poor people live and trying to make society aware of it. The great Charles Dickens, and you will read A Christmas Carol at the end of the course, he at times would do that. Okay. The prose of a story is the focus is on narrative or the exposition. The narrator is often more removed than the persona of a poem, less involved. There can be some figurative language, but this, believe it or not, will distract the reader from the actual reading, because in the actual reading there is a sequence of images anyway. There is dialogue, there is general observation. So when you have figurative language, you're making the reader do just a little bit of extra work that she might not need to do to get the story into her mind. And it usually focuses on historical truth. Not always, though. I mean, fantasy writing is obviously dealing with a history that we will never experience, as does science fiction.